Welcome to Should Have Known It, where we present 15-minute shows of things you definitely should know. Hi, welcome to Shoulda Known It. I'm Mr. Whitfield, and today's topic is inversion thinking. We are trained from the very beginning to orient toward goals, set the target, visualize the outcome, build the roadmap, and this training is so thorough, so consistent that most people never notice the fundamental problem with it. The space of how to succeed is essentially infinite. There are thousands of ways to build a great company, run a strong marriage, or master a discipline, and reasonable people disagree violently about which ones work. But here's what Charlie Munger noticed, and what most people miss entirely. The space of how to fail is actually quite small. It is bounded. It is legible. The ways to destroy a business, ruin a partnership, or sabotage your own health cluster into recognizable categories that repeat across history with remarkable consistency. The failure set is finite. The success set is not, and this asymmetry matters enormously. If success has 1,000 possible routes and failure has 12, then a strategy that eliminates all 12 failure modes has done something extraordinary. It has cleared the field without specifying a single positive step. You now have room to find whatever path works. That is a different kind of leverage than most people ever think to use. Munger borrowed this idea from a 19th century mathematician named Carl Gustav Jacob Jacobi, who was known to advise his students, invert, always invert. Jacobi used inversion as a problem-solving technique in algebra. When a problem resists direct assault, approach it backwards from the other end and see what the solution implies. Munger translated that mathematical discipline into a philosophy of practical life. The exact quotation most people cite is from Munger's 1986 Harvard School commencement address, where he said he was asked to give advice on how to have a happy life. His answer was to invert. Instead of thinking about how to have a happy life, think about what would guarantee misery and then do the opposite. He listed 3 things that would make him miserable: ingesting chemicals that alter mood and perception, envy, and resentment. His prescription was simply avoid those 3 things. That's the entire framework. Notice what he did not do. He did not consult the happiness literature, cite Aristotle's eudaimonia, or build a 12-step program toward flourishing. He looked at the left side of the ledger, the specific, verifiable ingredients of failure, and then inverted. Avoiding stupidity reliably beats seeking brilliance. That phrase is the core of the whole enterprise, and I want you to hold it. Let me give you the method in full. Inversion thinking proceeds in 3 steps. First, you take your goal and formulate its opposite as a question. Not how do I achieve X, but how would I guarantee that X never happens or is destroyed or fails completely? Second, you answer that question as specifically and ruthlessly as you can. You are not being pessimistic, you are being an engineer examining a bridge for stress points. Third, you use that list to constrain your behavior and design. Here is what makes step 2 so useful. People are dramatically better at identifying failure modes than success modes. Ask someone how to build a successful restaurant, and they will fumble. There are hundreds of plausible theories, and almost none of them are reliable predictors. Ask the same person how to guarantee a restaurant fails, and they will answer fluently. Bad location, inconsistent quality. Owner who won't fire bad staff, running out of cash before the 4th month, ignoring food costs. These answers are not opinions. They are patterns confirmed by thousands of bankruptcies. This is not a rhetorical trick. The asymmetry is real. Failure has structure. There is a reason insurance actuaries can price mortality tables, but no one can price the upside of a founder's next idea. Death comes in countable flavors. Extraordinary success is irreducibly individual. Inversion exploits that asymmetry by concentrating effort on the side of the ledger where the problem is actually tractable. Munger and Warren Buffett built Berkshire Hathaway's investment framework almost entirely around inversion. They did not start each investment by asking, why will this company succeed? A question that is hard to answer reliably in advance. They started instead by asking, what could make this investment a disaster? And then they asked a second-order question, is there a reason those failure modes are less likely here than in the average case? Buffett has said publicly that his and Munger's primary job is not to identify great companies. It is to disqualify bad ones. The process is closer to medicine than to treasure hunting. A diagnostician does not cycle through all possible diagnoses looking for the right one. They eliminate the dangerous ones quickly, and what remains gets worked up. The criteria for disqualification: high debt in a cyclical business, management that misleads on small things, a product that competes purely on price, are derived directly from the failure inventory. And the record bears this out. Munger has said that most of Berkshire's great results came not from brilliance in picking winners, but from avoiding the standard mistakes: overpaying, betting on bad character, buying into businesses with structural disadvantages. The positive cases, Coca-Cola, See's, Candies, American Express, are well known. What is less celebrated is the vast catalog of things they declined to buy, and precisely why and how often that restraint was itself the performance. There is a reason inversion is taught almost nowhere despite being this useful, and it has to do with how motivated cognition works. Forward-facing goal orientation is emotionally rewarding. It produces dopamine. It lets you imagine the success state in vivid, flattering terms. Inversion, by contrast, requires you to dwell on failure, to picture your project destroyed, your relationship fractured, your reputation in pieces. That is uncomfortable, and the discomfort is not accidental. Psychologists call this phenomenon optimism bias, the consistent tendency to overestimate favorable outcomes and underestimate unfavorable ones. A 2011 paper by Tali Sharut in Nature Reviews Neuroscience found that roughly 80% of people exhibit measurable optimism bias across cultures, and that the bias is stronger for outcomes the person cares about more. In other words, the more important the decision, the more your brain is working against realistic failure analysis. You need an external counterweight. Inversion is that counterweight. The practical consequence is that inversion feels like pessimism to people who haven't practiced it, which creates a social cost in organizations especially. The person who stands up during a planning meeting and says, "Let me tell you 12 ways this fails," is often perceived as obstructionist. The culture rewards the person with the bold vision, not the person cataloging the structural risks. And yet the bold visionaries fail at predictable rates, for predictable reasons that a 30-minute inversion exercise might have flagged in advance. The closest thing inversion thinking has to an institutional implementation is the premortem developed formally by psychologist Gary Klein in the late 1990s. Klein's technique is simple. Before a project launches, you call a meeting and tell everyone to assume, hypothetically, that it is now 1 year from now and the project has failed completely. Not if it fails, it has failed. Your job is to write down why. Klein's research showed that this framing, projecting into an imagined future failure rather than speculating about a possible one, reliably unlocks concerns that people were suppressing during the optimistic planning phase. In one study, teams that ran a premortem identified 30% more risks than teams that ran a standard risk assessment meeting. The technique works because it changes the social permission structure. You're no longer undermining the plan, you are diagnosing a corpse. 30% on a complex project. 30% more identified risks is not a marginal improvement. It is the difference between catching the thing that kills you and missing it. NASA has used variants of this technique since the Columbia disaster investigation. Amazon runs them as standard practice before major product launches. The US Army calls it a red team exercise. All of them are inversion in institutional clothing. Let me put a sharper point on the mathematics here, because I think it is genuinely underappreciated. Suppose you're trying to optimize for a good outcome. In theory, you have two strategies: pursue excellence directly or eliminate failure modes systematically. Strategy 1 requires you to find the right answer out of a very large solution space. Strategy 2 requires you to identify and avoid a bounded set of known errors. The second strategy is not more modest. It is more tractable. There is a concept in information theory called entropy, roughly the measure of disorder or uncertainty in a system. A system with many equally likely states has high entropy, a system with few probable states has low entropy. The space of ways to succeed at a hard problem has very high entropy. Almost everything is possible in principle, and very few things are likely in practice. The space of ways to fail predictably has low entropy. The same failure modes appear again and again. Working in low entropy space is simply easier, and the probability that you identify something real and actionable is much higher. This is why Munger's notebooks are full of what he calls the great failure modes of human cognition, the list of psychological tendencies that reliably produce bad decisions. He has enumerated 25 of them, from reward-induced bias to social proof to first conclusion bias. He is not trying to build a complete theory of good thinking. He is mapping the failure set of human rationality so that he can route around it. The map of failure is worth more to him than any map of the optimal path. Let me give you a concrete worked example. Suppose you want to build a lasting professional reputation, the kind that survives 30 years in a field. The forward question, what do I need to do to build a great reputation, has thousands of plausible answers, most of which are culture-specific, industry-specific, and not reliably causal. Produce great work, network strategically, build a personal brand, find a mentor. These are all potentially useful and none are guaranteed. Now, invert. How do you guarantee your reputation is destroyed in 30 years? The list is much shorter and far more confident. Get caught lying once, significantly publicly. Betray a confidence that someone trusted you with. Take credit for work that isn't yours. Fail someone badly when it costs you something to help them. The list has maybe 8 entries, and every experienced person you ask will give you roughly the same 8. This is not opinion, it is empirical data from observing how reputations actually collapse. The insight that emerges from this exercise is not just avoid those 8 things. It is that the positive strategy, produce great work, build a brand, does almost nothing to protect against any of those 8. A person who has built an impressive positive reputation is just as capable of destroying it in one afternoon as a person who hasn't, which means the failure inventory identifies a category of work, call it reputation maintenance, that the success-oriented framing left invisible entirely. I want to be precise about what inversion does not do, because the framework can be misapplied. Eliminating failure modes does not by itself create success. There is a logical step between I have avoided all known failure modes and I have therefore succeeded, and that step is not guaranteed. A business that avoids all the classic failure modes can still fail because the market shifted, the timing was wrong, or a competitor got lucky. Inversion clears the field, it does not plant the crop. Munger is explicit about this. He describes himself not as a genius at picking winning investments, but as someone who has cataloged and internalized a large enough library of failure modes that his pattern recognition fires reliably when one is present. That is a different claim. He is saying he is a skilled diagnostician of stupidity, and that this skill, applied consistently over decades, compounds into extraordinary results. The positive genius, the one who can identify the transformative opportunity in advance, is rarer and arguably less necessary than the culture suggests. There is also a failure mode specific to inversion itself. Some people, upon discovering the method, become paralyzed by it, cataloging risks indefinitely as a way of avoiding the moment of commitment. The failure inventory is meant to be done quickly and then acted upon, not used as a permanent refuge from decision. Munger does not take months to enumerate risk. He has internalized the major categories over decades, and the exercise for any particular decision takes minutes. Here's the practical implementation I recommend. Pick one significant decision you are currently facing: a career move, a financial commitment, a creative project, a relationship choice. Write at the top of a piece of paper, how would I guarantee this fails? Set a timer for 15 minutes. Write every answer you can produce without censorship. Be specific, be ruthless, be imaginary if necessary. Project yourself into the disaster and narrate it backward. When the timer stops, look at your list. Cross out anything that is genuinely outside your control. Catastrophic black swans, acts of God. What remains is your failure inventory, the set of things that are within the causal reach of your decisions and that predictably produce the outcome you're trying to avoid. Now design around them. Change your plan not by adding new positive steps, but by specifically eliminating the mechanisms on that list. This exercise, done once, reliably produces 2 to 4 insights that the forward-facing plan never surfaced. Done consistently, over years across major decisions, it produces something more significant: a calibrated internal library of failure modes specific to your own context, your own blind spots, your own recurring patterns of error. That library is the asset Munger built over 70 years. It is not a personality trait. It is a practice, and it is learnable. I want to end with one observation that I find genuinely moving about this framework. There is something quietly humble about inversion thinking, something that runs against the cultural premium on visionary boldness. Munger is essentially saying, I do not trust my ability to identify brilliance reliably, but I do trust my ability to recognize stupidity, and rather than pretending to a capacity I don't have, I will play the game I can actually win. That is not pessimism, that is calibration, the willingness to work within honest limits rather than flattering ones. And the irony, the beautiful practical irony, is that this willingness to be modest about the upper end of cognition produces results that the overconfident forward planners routinely fail to achieve. Avoiding stupidity reliably beats seeking brilliance. Jacoby knew it. Munger built a career on it. The method is sitting right there, waiting for you to use it. Mr. Whitfield closes the satchel with one firm snap, scans the room once. The practiced look of a man checking that something was understood, not just heard, and walks to the door. The lights go out. And that brings us to the end. Thank you for joining me. I hope you learned something new. Until next time.